In the 1930s, a freezing fur trapper made his way to a small Arctic village to take shelter for the night. Expecting to find fires, full tents, and a place to rest, what he found instead would send a literal chill down his spine. The camp had turned into a ghost town, their belongings frozen in time. How could an entire community disappear without a trace? Today, we're investigating the Missing Lake Anjikuni Village. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the unknown. I'm your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing about this case for the very first time, Alfredo Diaz.
Okay, kind of gives me like Roanoke vibes.
Yeah.
Just like a bunch of people that live in a certain area and they go missing.
Yes.
So it could be a number of things. It could just be bonk standard. They up and left, or maybe they were pushed out by people, or supernatural aspects to it, things like that. I'm very interested to see, because it said a lot of their belongings were left behind, but to what extent? You know what I mean? Was it literally like a pick up and go in that moment? You know, were they leaving valuables, weapons, things like that? And if there's just any signs of struggle at the camp, that'd be very interesting too to see.
These are all very good questions, very good memory. As far as Roanoke, it's definitely the one that comes to mind for sure. We've covered that one, Task Force, ages ago. That one I think is closer to solve these days than it was when we covered it, but definitely go listen to that episode. But yeah, dude, this tale gripped people way back in the 1930s when it first kind of hit the telegrams. It seemed to be going viral, kind of like an old school creepypasta. We'll talk about that. But then eventually got published, and then it got reignited in the mid-50s when it made its way into a book. And so really this story has been around in many different iterations for quite some time. And so what we want to do today is I think we have an answer. I think we have a crack into this case. And so I think we can solve it. And I think a solve is out there to be seen. And so when we get to the end, Fredo, I'll consult you and see if you're convinced. Task Force, you'll have to let us know. But yes, ultimately, this is a very, very intriguing story. So we're going to strip it down and get as honest as we could find through all the different resources as to what the disappearance actually looked like. And then we'll go into kind of a quick investigation phase, the origin of this story. And then, of course, the theories, which do extend anywhere from supernatural to very natural, like corporeal theories. There's a lot of little theories we'll sprinkle in. And then, of course, we'll end with what I think confidently, to me, answers and maybe closes this particular intriguing case. As we dive in, I do want to say, Fredo, we are busy boys. We're running around, running amok. What's happening in the Red Web universe? Well, this Wednesday, we have a live Discord event where we're going to go back over our Black Swan in Ghost Investigation. Normally, Task Force, that's a thing we record and then put out. This time, we're going to do it live like we did in October. That's going to be this Wednesday at 5 p.m. Central Time. So become a buff scientist and join us there. You can kind of join the live chat and see what you see as we record it. Thursday, we have another Scary Stories podcast that happens right here, wherever you listen to us. And then Friday, we have another horror gameplay as chosen by your votes this time. So Fredo, we're hopping in the saddle of a game called Species Unknown.
Oh.
Yeah. And real quick, today we have an audience survey in the description. It only takes just a few minutes and it's completely optional, so don't feel pressured. But it's a better way for us to get to know you guys, whether you've listened for 5.5 years or you're brand new to Red Web. We want to get to know you guys. So if you feel like it, there is an audience survey. Like I said, link in the description wherever you listen to us, and we would really appreciate it. This topic, I should say, comes to us from Task Force member Z-Man 1995, so thank you very much. I want to take you to the far north, and as you're thinking about this, I want you to have this mental image. You know, we watched the series, Fredo, called The Terror. And it's about HMS Terror as they looked for the Northwest Passage. We're not that far north, but we are in that arena. And so I think that might help give you context, visuals where there aren't too many visuals. Okay?
And how cold it is.
Very cold. Very, very cold. So this story begins at Lake Anjikuni, which is a lake located in the Kivalliq region of Nunavut, Canada. Now, there aren't a lot of images, modern images of this lake, because it is in quite the far reaches of the north, and there's a lot of freshwater lakes in the area. But I do have one that comes to us from photographer Nicholas Perrault. So this kind of gives you an idea of the flatness, the rocky coast, and a little bit of a visual of what we're looking at here.
Oh yeah, if it gets windy here, you got no cover at all.
That's a great point. Zero cover.
It's flat.
It's so flat. This looks like Indiana. I'll be honest. There's spots in Indiana where you'd be lucky to see some hills like that.
Yeah, it looks beautiful though.
Yeah, very serene, beautiful skies, but you are so far north. Let me help paint that picture. Because if you're unfamiliar with the northern Canadian territories, I'll put it this way. The lake is just a few degrees south of the Arctic Circle. So if you looked at that latitude, you are kind of on par with southern parts of Alaska, southern parts of Greenland. You're really, really up there. And Nunavut actually reaches way further north. This is the territory that HMS Terror was discovered in, but it was discovered further north still. The area surrounding the lake is extremely remote, and it's known for its cold, harsh winters, as you can imagine, which leave it quite barren. You know, there's a little bit of greenage, a little bit of grass, but you're not going to see rolling hills of green trees and other things like that. As far as animals, you might see caribou that migrate through this area frequently. So it's not like it's completely, it's kind of like an Arctic desert, but it's not completely devoid of any life. But the story of the vanishing village begins in 1930s, when the surrounding area was supposedly home to a small Inuit village just off the lake's shoreline. In the centuries prior to today's focus, the region was a hunting and fishing ground for the Inuit peoples living in the region, and much of their history, I should say, has been passed down through oral tradition. Beyond that, there was minimal contact from outsiders, though we know English explorer Samuel Hearne, for example, made his way through the region in 1770, as well as, I believe, through 1772. He made a few treks up and around this lake. And then by the late 1800s, there was some interaction with fur traders and just trade happening, but most of that history is relegated to trade logs and things like that. So really, this all gives clarity as to why the history prior to the 1930s is pretty foggy, let alone the fact that today's discussion is dominated by the search engine. So if you search this lake, you're pretty much going to get people talking about this mystery rather than anything else that happened before it, really. So
okay,
it kind of makes this location hard to explore the history of, but also you can kind of see the echo chamber that this mystery might live in because of it. But it's interesting. Yeah, I was just so blown away that I'm like, I can't believe we can't find more about this area to get more context as to who's living there, when, why, and all of that. Now, with that context, let's come back to the 1930s and the reports of this small village. Now, although the community was small, the villagers were said to be welcoming to outsiders. It wasn't uncommon for fur trappers to take shelter in the village, and if they stayed out, hunting for too long, they were welcomed in so they could warm their heels and all of that sort of thing. Now, fur trapping, if you don't know, it's an act of hunting animals and using their hides and fur in commercial trade. One fur trapper was named Joe LaBelle, and he planned to do exactly this in November of 1930. While sources give us the month and the year, it's unclear exactly what date he made this journey and when he found, the specific day he found this village. As the story goes, LaBelle was fur trapping in the area around Lake Anjikuni when he lost track of time and it began to grow dark. Knowing about the nearby Inuit camp, LaBelle set out to find shelter for the night. However, when LaBelle neared the camp, he found something strange. In previous times, LaBelle could hear the camp before he saw it. Dogs would be barking, people would be talking, the general sounds of life, especially when the land is so flat, you would imagine that sound would carry for a distance. True. So this paints an image of an experienced fur trader in the area. I'm giving you details to hold on to. Now, when he arrives at this village, instead, he's met with complete silence. In fact, when he gets to the camp itself, here's how he describes it. He saw 6 empty tents, and on the record, he said that 25 to 30 men, women, and children were all nowhere to be found. The number differs depending on the source you look at. Upon investigation, LaBelle found that food was burned over still smoking fire pits. Clothes were still being sewed with needles embedded in the cloth mid-stitch, as if something urged them to flee whatever they were doing in the act.
Yeah, so this was a pick up and leave immediately.
By all accounts, it would seem that way, yeah.
I mean, when you got food burning, for sure, this was like what would force people to just up and leave, you know?
Right.
But then also, I don't think there's been any discussion about like a body or anything like that.
No?
And so it just seems like it's a very unique situation where it's like, everyone drop what you're doing right now. We're going, not coming back. And there's no, it's like immediate danger, but not the highest level threat of danger where, you know, you could get killed or something. So it's very eerie.
Yeah, like you would think that if it was so disastrous that there might be some evidence, maybe somebody was hurt. There's blood here, there's a body there.
Yeah, like a struggle.
But I think that's what makes this tale so gripping and why it stood the test of time is much like Roanoke, much like Dyatlov Pass, much like incidents, whether people were found or not, evidence found or not. It's such an eerie moment that you can't really fathom what the people went through to get to the situation where Roanoke is completely empty, or the Dyatlov Pass hikers are found in very strange patterns, half undressed, completely different locations on the mountain. It's really hard to comprehend what could fill that gap without feeling like you're entering, well, monsters, myths, and legends, right? Like, well, that can't exist, so how did we get here?
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so terrifying, so gripping. In fact, there's some other details. Kayaks were left along the edge of the lake, and this one really stood out to me. LaBelle said he found 7 sled dogs that seemingly died from starvation, still tied up to their posts. It was at this point that LaBelle says he knew the situation was drastic, as the villagers would not have left their dogs behind. In fact, to kind of build on what he seems to be indicating here, sled dogs are arguably one of the most valuable survival assets in Inuit culture. So either something truly dramatic happened here, something truly terrifying where they fled despite their best instincts, or we have a tale that's got a few details out of order.
Right.
Like something feels amiss. So which is it?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that they left in a hurry. This adds another level, another degree of urgency when you're leaving life behind.
Right. Yes. Especially life that is extremely utilitarian.
True.
And as a dog lover, they're dogs, but like sled dogs that can get you around much quicker. These truly are animals that are partners in survival.
You think it would be a priority because of the fact of like, oh, I need to get out of here quick, but also they would be very helpful for me as I'm fleeing or trying to survive outside of the village. I would almost categorize them as important as like family members.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally.
Or like a vehicle, you know what I mean? Like their importance is very high. Their utility is very high.
Right. And there's one other element here I want to describe before we take inventory, and I want to get your outside perspective on some of what we've already talked about, because I know the entire case now, and I want to be careful about playing my hand too quick, too early. I want to see where your head's at. But finally, his reports turn to the most morbid discovery. Beyond, obviously, I mean, everything's pretty morbid here, but what he saw was what looked to be dug up graves. Some accounts say one grave, some say several, but either way, LaBelle believed that this was done by a human, not so much as an animal, because there were burial stones that were used to cover the graves that he said had been removed and stacked over to the side. He also describes the rocks of the area. You know, you can picture the coast of that lake. You see how rocky it is. He said that some of the rocks around the graves seemed to be intentionally there, and an animal might not have known, so they would have been disturbed. But if a human did this, they might have known to avoid them. Either way, he describes graves that had been dug up. And so all of these findings seem to point to a sudden, unplanned departure from the area. Again, I want to stop there. I want to get your thoughts. Do you want to take inventory? We have missing people, 6 empty tents, kayaks left behind, clothes looking like they were being mid-sewn, food that was still cooking over still smoldering fires, or smoke was present, sled dogs left behind, and disturbed graves. What's standing out to you?
Honestly, a lot of confusion because of the fact of, now we get to the graves. I'm thinking, okay, grave robbers. But when you have kayaks and dogs being left behind, like those are valuable things that you would take.
Right.
You wouldn't just leave that behind. And so it makes you think, okay, humans came, pushed them out immediately, but then also left valuables.
Yes. And so what was their goal? What's the motivation? What are we missing? What could be missing from this scene aside from the people? So maybe they were kidnapped, right? That's an easy conclusion.
Yeah.
Maybe whatever it was didn't cause them to flee, but instead caused them to get snatched. And again, we'll talk about all the theories, but I really wanted your outside perspective on a few things, so I didn't tip your hand here. But
so maybe the priority was the people then, because it doesn't sound like things were turned over. The grave kind of throws me for a loop, though.
Right, because that's not a quick thing.
It seems like the priority is the people, but then you're also taking the time to dig up graves.
Totally.
Which would most likely be you're looking for things of monetary value, but then you also left things of monetary value behind. Unless it's just some super deep cut, like, your grandpa, where is he buried? He has a map of like treasure that I know. You know what I mean? Like something wild like that. That's just so deep cut. It didn't surface to the public.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with the dug up graves. We'll talk more about that from a cultural perspective, task force members. I know some of you are itching to mention something here. But what stood out to me when first going over this was the implied timeline. Of course, you have still smoking ashes, which imply this happened imminently before his arrival. Maybe as much as a day. I've been camping before where you wake up and you realize your fire came back and then burned itself out, so it's still smoldering, and that's kind of scary, but maybe as much of it as a day. But then you have starved animals, and any starved creature is not going to pass in a few days. And then there's food still cooking on the fire, so I'm kind of confused. Were they starved before the fleeing?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just pointing out a few things that stand out to me here.
That's a good point, because the timeline doesn't add up, right? Mm-hmm. It'll take time for the dogs to pass. So then, were they being neglected and then like they left? Or like people came, they came for the people and kind of used that place as a home base for like a day or two, neglecting the dogs in the meantime. And then when they did leave, that's how everything was still smoldering or left out.
Oh, interesting. I can see how that would pull pieces together, because clothes that are left behind mid-stitch and still smoldering fires kind of flies in the face of dug up graves and dogs that are left starved.
Does.
But again, I raise these questions because I want you thinking about those as we kind of enter the theories. What could possibly answer for those things? We'll see. But again, it does create a scene of fright. It's why it's such a sticky story, and it does seem to indicate an unplanned sudden departure in some ways. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Rocket Money. Task Force, let me ask you a question. How many subscriptions do you think you're paying for right now? Do you even know? If you're like me, I would have no idea. Sometimes I lose track of it, and that's where Rocket Money comes in, because I use Rocket Money. I know Fredo does. And even on the free plan, they track all this goodness for you in one convenient place, so you can see what you're paying for, what's going out the door, what's coming in, and they also categorize it. It really is a nice and convenient way to see all of your spending in one place. If you're trying to get your budgets in order, I can't recommend it enough. But coming back to subscriptions, a lot of people forget off the top of their head how many they have. Maybe you had a trial that suddenly turned on and you've been paying for something quietly, racking up the bills, and Rocket Money is there to help you. Rocket Money can track subscriptions and has the ability to cancel unwanted ones within the app with just a few taps. It has saved users over $800 million just in canceled subscriptions alone. Rocket Money can consolidate checking, savings, loans, and investments into a single dashboard to give users a clear view of their financial picture. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/redweb. That's rocketmoney.com/redweb. Jot this one down, rocketmoney.com/redweb. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Prize Picks. The playoff push is heating up and tournament hoops are here. And there's no better way to cash in on the high-flying hoop actions than Prize Picks, America's #1 sports pick app. Every bucket, every dime, and every win means there's more when you're playing on Prize Picks. So don't pass up on your next shot with Prize Picks and get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. I have downloaded Prize Picks, and I gotta tell you, they are true to their word. It is easy to dive right in, so no matter what sport you're looking for, if you're experienced in volleyball and you know all the players, bam, right there on the front page, and you can tab over to whatever sport you're looking at. And if you're a big fan of basketball, I've been watching Purdue, even though they're out right now, but you can see all the things that are right there, and it's as simple as clicking more or less on various player projections. It seems to add another dimension to sports. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. Prize Picks now has early payouts. If your player gets a hot start, you now have the option to cash out on those winnings before the game even finishes. Get in on the action. Prize Picks is now available in all 50 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code REDWEB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code REDWEB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Either way, deeply unnerved by these discoveries, LaBelle made his way to the nearest telegraph station and alerted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. Now, they reportedly launched an investigation into the missing villagers, but no one was ever found. They didn't believe that anyone was killed, as there was no evidence of blood, and, of course, no bodies had been recovered. Although they couldn't conclude why the village was abandoned, they believe it sat empty for about 8 weeks before LaBelle made his discovery, which again yanks me right back to the timeline.
Yeah.
How do we have these smoke and fires? I can see now the starvation part,
Right.
But the other elements, the mid-stitch maybe, but the smoking fires, it starts to indicate something to me, you know?
Yeah, there's a gap here there's I don't know, either a gap that's missing, or if it's weeks, how is there stuff that's smoldering I don't know.
I'll tell you this. In my mind, there's 2 conclusions.
Okay.
One, this story is a game of telephone that has taken on a life far beyond reality.
Yes.
And so these elements get added in by people that don't aren't realizing that they're just embellishing a story, and or someone's lying.
Yeah.
Like, that's facts. Like, that's how I instantly start to feel when I start to see those details get so mixed up. And so, like, because there's other ways that this story is told that I didn't include,
Okay.
like permanent structures, stone buildings, and things.
Interesting.
I'll talk more about that in a bit, but
It very much seems like there might have been aspects that were embellished because of the fact of, in order for this to work out, the story almost becomes so absurd, right? Like, it's been abandoned for 2 weeks. Well, why is there like fresh things and smoldering that? And it gets like super niche. Someone else showed up, or they came back, and then you know what I mean? Like, it's so in the weeds of like such an intricate woven tale that the odds in my mind become really low that that's what happened, and more so leaning towards someone's embellishing, like humans do, and we've seen it time and time again. But that's kind of where I lean towards, right? There's a higher chance of that than this super unique situation that played its part.
right. It's kind of why I wanted to give the most stripped down iteration of this story, because it felt the closest to the original. It felt the most honest.
Right.
But even still, there's a lot of things that stand out to me that I'm like, not passing the vibe test. You know what I mean? Like,
going back to the beginning of the episode where you talked about how if you search this area, this kind of dominates the search and is the discussion, you know?
Yes.
And so from there, that's all people want to talk about in this area. And when you talk about something over and over and over again, you know, you embellish a bit. You want to add something new, something different. You want to spice it up. You told the story a bunch of times. Someone else has got some take on it that they unfortunately will kind of like implement as facts, you know?
Yeah. I mean, someone wants to get their podcast listened to or their video essay listened to. And so they make it sound darker. They make it sound more mysterious, and they neglect to mention whatever they might have iterated on, or if it is embellished, which is like, you know, we want to analyze. So this case is such an interesting one because it is taking this story that has been around the block and trying to solve it, trying to like be honest about it and intrigued in the story, but honest in its exploration. So I should say, before we dive into the origin of this story, which will help paint the picture for the theories, I want to say that the RCMP, you know, they looked into this, and eventually with no leads, no evidence, the case was closed. And we'll talk about a 1931 report that they made, but basically that seemed to put the kibosh on the case. Now, as you mentioned, this feels essentially like Roanoke. It feels like a modern, maybe Arctic version of Roanoke, and so you can see why this story is so gripping, especially for those who are more focused on the storytelling aspect of it, which is, for all intents and purposes, a fascinating story. But let's talk about the details behind it. These seem to come from journalist Emmett E. Kelleher, whose background beyond this story is almost impossible to find. We do know he's a journalist who writes for The Bee in Danville, Virginia, which is actually where the article on this first came up. So November 27th, 1930, Kelleher published an article on this. I took the article and cut it into two images because it's so vertically tall, but go ahead and take a look at these two images. You'll have the headline, the picture, and then the article goes down below it. But again, I cut it just so we can fit it on the screen.
Thursday, November 27th, 1930, Spanish Eskimo tribe gives North mystery stranger infection. Yeah, then it gets all the tents, pictures of what they look like.
Even says the village of the dead.
Oh, yeah. The small text under the photos. Village of the Dead. Yeah, very fancified up. And then the next one is just the write-up.
Yep, just the article.
What was it, Friday puzzle down there?
Yeah, you got a little puzzle down there. What is that, holiday puzzle?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Friday puzzle? What's 6 across? Supposedly, we couldn't find a picture of Mr. LaBelle, but supposedly Joe LaBelle is the trapper we were talking about before. That's him on the right.
Oh.
Per this article. Yeah. And thanks to newspapers.com for archiving this. That's the only way we were able to access it. Now, some sources state that Kelleher interviewed LaBelle, and that's how he collected the details of this story. That's how he made his article. I looked a little closer, and I really wanted to find out, how did a man in Virginia hear about a man in the far north reaches of Canada? How did this story come to pass? How was he the one that interviewed him? Because again, if he stumbled across this missing village sometime in November, how did a man in late November know to publish this? Well, when looking into it, another theory came up that was to say maybe it was a game of telephone, literally, like an old school version of a viral story. Like when he telephones in, or telegram, I should say, the RCMP, maybe other people overheard, or maybe the RCMP themselves had individuals who then shared this story, and then it kind of emanated out from there via telegram, which then found its way down to people in the States, and then this guy, Emmett, found it and then said, I want to write a story about it. But since its original publication, as you can imagine, the tale has evolved dramatically, and it's kind of difficult to figure out what is the original outside of the article here and what is the embellishment, but I'll give you a few of the things that have grown. So in the original story, we know it's somewhere, maybe about 25, maybe 30 men, women, and children who went missing. But some iterations of the story say 1,000 people. Some say 2,000 people disappeared overnight. Other iterations also indicate a more permanent setup with stone buildings, and that this was more of a permanent village rather than a kind of a temporary set up tents and then move on. I'm laying the groundwork.
Wild to me, because you could just have like a news reporter go there and then just go, this place cannot house thousands of people. There are no stone buildings here. Done. You know what I mean? Done. Figured it out.
I think that's the thing, though, is it is so far north that most people can't afford or will want to do it. But I did want to get some context on these numbers. And again, we're talking about 1930, and the numbers I have are more from like 2016 or 2021, but the Canadian census says the Nunavut territory has just about 31,000 Inuit people. I think the total population is somewhere around 42,000 people. So for, what is that, 6.5%? 2,000 of the total modern day Inuit people to disappear overnight? That is dramatic. So you could see how some of the elaborations don't really stand up to logic.
Right. And what's also interesting too, when you think about just the amount of people or just the people in general, you got to think like what actually truly happened to them, because would there not be generations, right, if they survived? And then somewhere along those lines, they would settle somewhere. And then they would see that this is like a whole big thing and be like, hey, this was my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. And like, maybe I don't know the true details, but like, here I am. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know, right? Because then, yeah, where's the generations to come?
That's the tough part. You make a great point. On one hand, where are the survivors? And if they are out there saying, hey, we just went over here, man. We migrate, okay? And we went over here, done. Well, given that their history is mostly oral, and given the fact that, like, this has now hit Western media, it's taken on a whole life of its own that they're probably not going to get heard into the, Western zeitgeist. And
true.
But then also, like, if it didn't happen at all, then of course there'd be no survivors to say anything because nobody disappeared.
You also have to think too, it's like, yeah, this area is so remote, and then also their voices to be carried into the Western zeitgeist. But it also seems like, at what point does it become so big, right? That it's worth exploring, or at least to media or people where it's profitable to spend resource, time and money, etc., to go out here and look for people, look for answers, visit the site, etc.
Well, I think that is exactly right, and I think that might be an element at play, right? The fact that no one's done that might say a lot about the veracity of this story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If there's not a lot to stand on, why am I going to go running after it, kind of thing?
Right. True.
So we'll explore it. I always say this, I don't like to be a wet blanket because, you don't want to be out here just going, nah, nothing's real, nothing happens. But like, cases come along where sometimes we just got to be honest with what we're seeing and what we're feeling, and that's how it's probably going to crumble. But before we get into that, I will say, not our opinion, the validity of this story has been debated for years. Many other people, many scholars have looked at this and thought that the whole scenario was pretty difficult to believe. It was elaborate. Maybe it was even a ruse by author Frank Edwards, right? He published his book called Stranger Than Science. We'll talk more about this idea and the theories, but that book came out, I believe, in 56, but at least in the 50s, reinvigorating this story and launching it further into the kind of paranormal community that is looking after this as far as paranormal events, alien events. We'll talk about all of it, but several theories have emerged over these many years as to what might have happened to the villagers. A lot of speculation, a lot of critical and analytical analysis. I mean, that's what we're going to do here, is be very honest about these theories, because I believe that there is a strong answer as to what occurred here or maybe didn't occur, right? I think is equally important. Any thoughts before we dive into those theories?
No, I'm just very interested to get into the theories of, and because if there's one like leading theory in my mind, it's not going to be a theory that connects everything together. It's going to be a theory that carves out pieces that were potentially elaborated on. It's kind of where my mind is at in this moment.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Like this piece out of 100 is the real true one, and we address that.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, we're going to start off with the furthest from home and work our way inward. And what's further from home than aliens? Okay. One theory states that this entire village might have been abducted by extraterrestrial life. This case was described in the book World's Greatest UFO Mysteries, written by Nigel Blundell and Roger Bohr. In it, they describe that the RCMP interviewed a trapper named Armand Laurent and his two sons. Now, some sources say that the sons and the father were actually interviewed directly by the authors rather than the trapper, but either way, information made its way to the book, and these three men describe what they see as a large cylindrical object that morphed into a bullet shape and then took off into the direction of Anjikuni Lake. So, yes, have there been countless of UFO sightings and UAP sightings over the many, many years? We've covered many of them ourselves, and one seems to be in that region. Does that mean that they were all abducted? Not necessarily. Does it mean that they actually saw a UFO and not something else? Not necessarily. But that's kind of what this theory leans on. Other versions of this theory state that the RCMP reported seeing a pulsing blue light over the lake, but were never able to determine what exactly it was. However, as you can imagine, because the authors Blundell and Bohr were not able to provide any concrete proof that the entire village was abducted by aliens, this theory has largely been rejected.
Yeah, I didn't think there'd be much ground to stand on for that theory.
Now, I want to cover some smaller theories before we get into the idea of natural causes, which I think is really fascinating, and then the idea of this being a myth. So, some smaller, more unsubstantiated theories I have seen float around kind of range the gambit. I'd be remiss, honestly, if I didn't mention some of these at least, so let's just hit them. Some people believe that this was the result of giants from Inuit folklore. There is a whole community out there that believe in the idea of ancient giants and that there could still be living modern giants. I'll be honest, there's zero evidence for this and there's not much else to be said about that.
Yeah. It's still interesting to hear though.
Yeah, for sure.
I still want to hear that theory, you know, the kind of like far out there ones. Those are the most fun. It's giving me troll vibes.
Oh my God.
Cover that movie for Movie Club. That was a fun, wild ride.
Yeah, Troll Hunter.
But yeah, man, like there's not going to be anything for that for sure.
No. Yeah. Another theory says that this might have been an electromagnetic anomaly. It goes so far as to, and I think we're deep into the realm of pseudoscience here, but it goes so far as to say that maybe magnetic north had a sudden shift to it. A concept that's not too outlandish. There's some logic within there, as most pseudoscience kind of has, but I don't know how that would make a certain populace in a very localized area evaporate. You know what I mean?
Yep, exactly.
Especially if the other living entities there, the pups, the sled dogs, didn't also disappear.
Yeah, that's a thing. There's other living entities there to kind of like battle that. Mm-hmm. And then you can get way too into the nitty gritty of like, oh, it's not a human, different DNA, whatever. I don't know, it's too complex.
That makes us too special.
Too overly convoluted.
For the magnetic field of this planet to decide, well, I don't like this pair of humans, swap, is so egocentric. Like, it just doesn't make any sense in the first place.
No.
But I digress. Yeah. It's a fascinating concept. It's why we explore this podcast. But like, anyway, there's an interesting idea though. Another theory came up called Arctic hysteria. It's known as Pibloktok, I believe is how it's pronounced. It's a cultural focused or culturally locked syndrome, and symptoms usually involve sudden intense fits where an individual might scream, tear off their clothes, maybe mimic the animal sounds of the area, and then run out into the tundra with no care for the dangers that they're throwing themselves into. Yeah, I wrote here that it's a culture-bound syndrome is what it's described as.
Interesting.
Yeah, like it's something more localized to the Inuit communities rather than like globally. And so that could be anything to do with belief systems, stories, or just culture in general. But it is an interesting idea. And I would struggle to see this applied to an entire population of 25 to 30 people suddenly doing this.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, how does that span a whole group of people?
Yeah.
Varying age ranges, I'm assuming, too, as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Fascinating, though. I didn't know anything about this. And again, when you start to get into the idea of hysteria, you start to get into that realm where you're kind of just like bottling a few things together without, fully understanding all of those elements. And I'm certainly not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And so I don't mean to be flippant about this idea, but it's interesting as a concept for sure. Now, of course, before we get out of here, we got to talk about Hollow Earth. We did a whole episode on it.
How does Hollow Earth come into play here?
Well, boy, let me crack open this planet and show you. So the theory is that they didn't run from anything, but rather that they retreated into a subterranean location, that they moved to inside of the Earth. Maybe they found a rare opening and off they went. Others say that an intelligent species from within the Earth brought them in, and now they cohabitate with this question mark species, whether it be humans or otherwise. I don't know. It's kind of where it gets a little hand wavy. It's out there. It's not based on anything, but it's certainly a theory that has floated around.
It's wild that it's like, okay, maybe they retreated into the Hollow Earth.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really address the urgency in leaving like dogs behind.
Unless, man, look, if they got an early copy of Dune 3, I'm in. Okay, I'm coming down below the planet's crust, and long term, I'll be down there. But, or maybe they flash me a Species 2.
Yeah.
Who knows? Like, we got it down here.
Yeah, and then also like coming up to take them, like very far-fetched. That one would make more sense, but it's still way out there.
But yeah, I mean, like, why them? Why now? Why here? And that's giving too much credence, too many good, thoughtful questions to a theory that is otherwise unsubstantiated completely. As we enter the more realistic, as we start to go to the natural causes, there is another smaller theory that is interesting, and that's the idea that they might have consumed tainted meat, which might have led to illness or possible hallucinations. It's not impossible, but ergotism, like I think is what it's called, where a certain bacteria is in the grass, can be consumed by the caribou. If they then consume that caribou meat, it could be contaminated. We've talked about that as an idea in other episodes before. It's not impossible, but it would be pretty rare given the location. If they consumed meat that was tainted by lead, if they had lead tools, then that's also possible, lead poisoning, but it doesn't really go too much further than that. But like I said, as we discuss these more natural ideas, let's segue into these earthly causes that have often been speculated. People have talked about food shortages, maybe a new threat to the area, maybe some sort of wildlife moved in that they weren't accustomed to or what have you, or maybe it was just an extra harsh winter that year. Some have speculated that they abandoned their camps for perfectly natural reasons. For instance, there were known famines in the region during the late 1920s, so it's possible that LaBelle simply stumbled into a legitimate camp that was abandoned due to starvation, which then became sensationalized. Maybe that's the core nugget of truth, that there was something there, some sign of life, but the idea that dogs were there, that a smoldering fire was still there, and all this other stuff,
right?
Maybe that just wasn't there.
Yeah, I didn't think about like the dogs being there and frozen over being embellished.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I put a little bit too much weight into that. Maybe it was literally just, it's too cold here, right? Going back to the picture there of the terrain, those winds are going to cut across that land. Nothing is blocking it.
Harsh, painful at that point. That's how cold it gets. Now, what's interesting is that like we start to get into more grounded territory with logic that makes sense to me. This one is coming after the core nugget, which is maybe LaBelle did stumble upon what used to be a settlement. Maybe there was sign of people having been there. And even if there were starved animals there, if there was a famine going on, that would make sense, right? That the pets would unfortunately fall victim to that sooner than the children, than the parents. But also, I started to think about like the food being over the fires, but again, that's probably just embellishment, right? At this point.
Yeah, that's the thing. Probably a lot of huge chunks of this stuff is embellished. I would think more so the way my brain settles is harsh conditions. They got up and left, right? And someone wanted to tell this fanciful story. It worked because we're here talking about it,
True.
And so I just feel like, someone came along, saw there was no one there, wanted to embellish a story, which got even more embellished, I'm sure. The more was told, and then here we are.
Keep that in mind, because this next theory, I think, explains this the best. because there are some gaps in here. And of course, it's taking the story at face value, the signs of a rushed departure, leaving the sled dogs behind, leaving the food behind, the belongings, all the other details. It's taking that at face value. So what is the one theory that best explains all of this? Well, to me, that's the final theory. It's kind of burying the lead, so I'm glad we're kind of talking about it now, but it explores the fact that potentially this was all one large myth, or in other words, a hoax.
Oh, just a straight up hoax. Like none of it was real.
Just straight up hoax.
What about the newspaper?
Well, let's dive into it.
Oh,
I don't want to say
goodness.
everyone out here is trying to make a buck. I'm not trying to say everyone is hoaxing.
Oh my God.
Let's talk about it. Because this is where, and I kept pulling myself back because I want to give an honest discussion to the other theories, but this is where my mind just keeps going. When everything can't line up, when everything falls apart, and you have to throw away most of the story in order to get a reasonable theory, my mind goes this direction. I can't help it, But that's just me. So let's talk about it and see how you feel. Although Joe LaBelle was, in fact, he was a real person and a real fur trapper, there was never any evidence or verification that he discovered a real abandoned village. Additionally, historical records show that LaBelle didn't even have a hunting license prior to 1930. And so when we talk about a man with experience
and tenure, yeah.
You're thinking, okay, well, I thought maybe more than a couple of months, especially if you're familiar with a village having been here or how the people in the area are or, what have you. So hold on to that for a second.
What?
Kelleher, the author of the article now, he's the one who received LaBelle's story, also had a reputation of exaggerating the news and embellishing details in his stories. And a lot of this was shown a light on by Brian Dunning of Skeptoid. He did a lot of investigating into this topic and into this story, and that's what he kind of came to the conclusion on when looking at all of his writings. It seems that Kelleher embellished. He's kind of the boy that cried wolf, and maybe he just wanted to get some papers sold.
There's some solid proof and evidence that he's just crying wolf.
Yeah.
And when every other article is just the wildest thing you'd ever read. The most exclusive story. I can't believe it. And it's all written by the same person.
Right. Things you've never heard of before, but only this man's got the answers.
Yeah, this man's got the scoop every time.
Listen, we're not out here to tell you how to scoot one by us, but if you're always the most, I'm going to start raising an eyebrow. But listen, if you start saying second most crazy story I've ever seen, second most haunted place, you start to go, hold on a second, it's not the most, maybe.
Yep. And the thing too is how to make it stick. Okay, talk about a place that's so remote that people can't really get to easily. No one can double check your facts then.
Now you're a skeptic, now you're cooking in there.
Yeah, that seems tactical.
So based on this information and the lack of actual proof of a village existing there, it's reported that the RCMP dismissed this story entirely as fabricated in 1931 rather than leaving it open as a cold case. There is a report that comes out with great detail from the RCMP that talks about this, but ultimately, since 1930, there has been no evidence of any Inuit village existing in that area. And this is where I like to dig into history and add a little bit more context beyond what seems to be the obvious, because I like to sneak a little bit of education in here, but I also like to learn myself. So something that I kind of just bit my tongue on for this whole episode, beyond the idea of this village not existing, I think it's incredibly important to understand that the Inuit people of this region are principally nomadic. While they would set up tents and temporary shelters, there's no reason to believe the iterations of this tale that go so far as to say that there were stone buildings or a permanent settlement, because that's just not part of how the cultures in the area live.
Yeah, that's true.
And to me, it feels even more loudly of a Western perspective getting their fingers into the story, because these are elements that would make sense to us in America, in the Western society,
True.
but wouldn't be honest to the victims of a potential disappeared village. You know what I mean?
Traditions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Their way of life. Yeah, good point. That's a very good point.
That also brings up the sled dogs, which are also a greatly respected and very important asset in that culture. So again, that either to the believer side says that something dramatic truly happened to leave something so important behind? Or B, is that another piece of misunderstood Western insight that embellished the story beyond, into their ignorance, right? You can see both sides, right? Now, while we're talking about it, it's very possible that there was once a temporary settlement here. I can't write that off because that's the nature of a temporary settlement. Whether LaBelle knew that or not, we will never know. But I could see it plausible that he found an old shelter spot that had long since been vacated as part of the nomadic lifestyle. Then, in order to garner newspaper sales and spark intrigue, a man who heard about this story later on, Kelleher, adds details like starved sled dogs and still smoking campfires and other signs of life. Again, this goes back to the westernization of it, but also how are you going to have still smoking fires when official reports are saying that the area was empty for 8 weeks? It just
doesn't line up. It's so much that contradicts itself. And again, it goes back to, for order this to work out, a wild series of events would have had to have taken place.
Yes, exactly. And this is as close to the source as we can get. We have the article from Kelleher saying one thing, and you have the RCMP saying another thing, and those two things don't line up. So now we're not in the telephone game. We're not in the realm of somebody exaggerating the 8 weeks, nor in the realm of exaggerating the still smoking campfire. So now, at the very heart of the story, we have facts that don't line up, and that, to me, is what tips my opinion one direction here. It's also possible that the other sign of life he saw here was a stone cairn. This is a human-made pile of stones used for things like navigation, memorials, burial sites, etc., and it wouldn't be unfamiliar in the territory. And so maybe just being a fur trapper, not knowing what this was, reports that, I don't know. He could have seen any number of factual human evidence, reported it. The RCMP goes, right, nothing to be seen here. But the world catches wind. Someone somewhere passes that telegram on, and then it kind of lives on.
Right, embellishes it greatly.
Either way, what remains certain is that the RCMP has been asked to provide reports or notes on this case multiple times, and they never have published anything of what they found other than that report in 1931, which kind of throws this out as having nothing to look at. Now, with that said, we always talk about the antithesis to the theory, the wrinkles in the theory. And there are those who still argue against this idea, the idea of a hoax. With regards to LaBelle's brand new hunting license, those who argue against this hoax say that, well, it's possible he was hunting illegally in the area for months or years or what have you. It wouldn't be uncommon at that time.
Very true.
And so maybe he still did have a factually deep knowledge of the region and of this potential village. It's also argued that, and this one's really hard for me to kind of stomach, to be honest. It's also argued that Kelleher's reputation of fabrication and exaggeration doesn't mean that the story can't be real. Some have even suggested that Kelleher's flair for the dramatics actually attracted him to LaBelle's story in the first place. And I'm thinking, sure, yeah, he's looking for a story he can embellish. And yes, maybe the boy that cries wolf will eventually see a wolf and be accurate one time. But I think you really have to lean on a man's reputation. I don't think you can just go, I don't know. When we're gasping for evidence, I don't think we can hand wave what little evidence we do have.
Agreed.
Even if it doesn't create a fascinating idea, even if it doesn't lead to haunted icebergs or aliens coming down, I don't know.
Reputation is reputation. That's the thing,
And especially even beyond Kelleher, you got a book published in the 1950s as we're entering UFO mania with the idea that this might have been, of that ilk. And so when you really pull yourself back, you try to analyze the facts as they are, the facts as they were, and the facts as they became, and in the time period that they kind of came rolling out, it starts to give you some more idea. Okay, yeah, maybe the 1950s are nudging this story into a more UFO-centric direction because that's just what's going on.
I think it didn't even cross my mind that could be a hoax or embellished or anything like that. And there just isn't enough.
Yeah,
and
right.
There's a lot that contradicts itself. And I do feel like if we truly wanted to have validated the story, we could have. I mean, easier said than done, but also despite, hey, I choose a remote location and there just isn't enough that lines up, and the story itself does contradict itself.
And again, it's tough because The story's fascinating. I want there to be something wild to go with it. But at the end of the day, I feel like I'm with you. And it lacks hard evidence, which is always kind of difficult with a paranormal story, of course. But it's also the contradicting evidence. It feels, like somewhere along the lines, maybe it wasn't LaBelle himself, but somewhere along the lines, the story was used for ulterior motives. And so ultimately, I'm left with feeling like this is a 100-year-old creepypasta. It's interesting, but maybe fictional.
Yeah, I lean towards fictional. It's a very mysterious story, but there wasn't anything to support anything at all.
Right.
Which is fine. And there's stories like that where it's like, okay, cool, I do believe it happens. But then also it just kind of gets to the point where I'm like, okay, do we believe all these things happen and they contradict each other? Now you're just getting even further and further away from being believable, right? When you compile all these things together.
That's a great point too, because what is it? Occam's razor, right? Which decision or which outcome takes the least number of assumptions? And in order to get to all of the other theories, a lot of assumptions, to your point, are being made about this part being real, this interacting with that other part in a real way. Really, the one that takes the least number of assumptions is that this is just kind of embellished, whether maliciously or not. Otherwise, I am very intrigued with the natural causes. You talk about a nomadic lifestyle mixed with the fact that in the recent years, there were actually famines going on. It's not impossible that created evidence of a small camp that no longer existed, and that just LaBelle being a new hunter, now with recontextualizing that, maybe being a new hunter wasn't actually as familiar as we thought he was, and so this was more alarming to him than reality truly was, and then from there it spirals off. Either way, I think it starts off innocent purely, and then it gets its way to somebody selling newspapers or someone selling a book.
Right.
Yeah. Ultimately, though, as it stands today, the tale of the disappearance in Lake Anjikuni Village is technically unsolved. It has so many questions around it that I don't think one can definitively, factually just go, this is the answer. Even if we feel like it's the most likely answer, it still takes some assumptions. And so it will still rage on in the paranormal sphere as to what happened in this particular location. But ultimately, it will be unclear. Were there unmarked empty graves? Were there lights in the sky? Were there evidence of any kind of a settlement there, temporary or otherwise? These will all be questions that will be probably forever impossible to answer definitively. But ultimately, the story and the myth of the missing village in Lake Anjikuni lives on.
Wild enough, not really anything paranormal.
Yeah.
You think there would be?
I mean, giants and aliens get into it. Some people have talked about ghosts and hauntings in the area, but
nothing like really heavy hitting on that end, which seemed like it would be the perfect setup for that too. So that was surprising.
I also wanted to say, this is something I forgot to say back when we were talking about it, but when we talk about Roanoke, your question is valid. Where are the people that survived to tell the story? If they were there, or if they did go somewhere, why don't we hear about them? And what's interesting, and I don't know, we talk about it a little bit in the Roanoke episode, but I think more and more evidence has continued to come out since then that, for many years, for centuries even, we thought Roanoke was just like a complete ghost story, like people disappeared and then that was it. But over the years, through oral history, through written history, and through many people from that time traveling in the area or living in the area, indigenous peoples, we know that indigenous tribes in the area tried to help out the Roanoke people. We know that now suddenly within their tribes, there are people that can read. There are English, and there are people with blue eyes, which seems to further bolster the idea of them having just moved away from their colony as everything was falling apart and just going, well, let's just live with the people who lived here and have lived here so we can at least survive. Because they didn't get the resources, they didn't get the help, they didn't get anything. Let's go make peace. And so there is times when you do hear about it, but people don't talk about it. And so the mystery stays a mystery because people don't And so here, though, to your point, though, if there was a person or people that disappeared, where are they? Where's the evidence, the sights of them later on, the stories told, but about, my grandfather saw this, or we moved here,
Right.
I think that is a
Nothing.
really big point here.
Yeah.
Well, Fredo, as we come to an end, a fascinating story. I feel like we have a strong, confident answer. It will forever remain unknown to many of us, though. And I want to shout out some of the task force members who talk about these theories over in our Discord channel, because I love some of the other ideas that we don't explore that you guys bring up. It creates such a thoughtful conversation after every episode, in addition to all the other discussions on our Discord.
That's the thing that makes the story interesting, is the fact that there's so much to discuss about it, even though it leans more towards a hoax.
Right. You could easily just go and throw it out.
There's so much to talk about.
There's so much to talk about. There's so much to ponder. Like, even if it's just for the enjoyment of, well, what could be, what if, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I think motivates all these mysteries at the end of the day. What if, or what about that? Okay. We have a huge name to shout out. The newest member of the Task Force Elite. Check this one. Commune member number 1195 from District 4. Thank you for being the newest member of the task force at redwebpod.com.
They volunteered as tribute.
They volunteer as tribute. Is District 4 now, are they like the lumberjack one, or are they the rich people one? Or like, that's what I don't know. I don't know Hunger Games that well.
Yeah, I don't know that well. The prequel series is coming out, though.
That's true. I did listen to that new book by, what's her name? Suzanne Collins. That was interesting. It was like Haymitch's
like,
Hunger Games.
Yeah, which is great because, you know, in the original series, he does talk about how like he once played the games as well. So,
yup, he's like a coach. Now I picture young Woody Harrelson running around as a young buck. It's interesting. It's a fascinating book. Anyway, side tangent. Ghost Fenrir 1 is our buff scientist of the week. Thank you very much for the slanging and the banging of the beakers. And our squonks of the week, Holster, Jordan Chase, and Neo Trickster. Thank you all so much. And of course, Z-Man 1995. And thank you for submitting this topic for the analysis of the Task Force Society. But with that, again, lots going on. Support us directly at redwebpod.com. Tons of weekly exclusives. And review the show. Share it with your mom. Share it with your friends. It is mom's #1 podcast, after all.
Yeah, that it is.
Even if she doesn't tell you. And if you tell her, Fredo, right? Like you told G-Ma, I tell my mom, they always kind of go, I don't know what that is. That's because they're real cool. You know, they keep it on the hush.
Yeah, they're real cool about it.
They don't want to harsh the mellow.
They know that they're day oneers, and like when it pops, they'd be like, oh man, I was there before.
Right. But they don't want to let you know because they're humble. Moms are humble, dude.
Very humble. Moms are very
Moms
humble.
are givers, lovers, and humble. So thank you, moms everywhere. But anyway, go talk to your moms about it. And with that, Fredo, I'll see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.